runs the group. She's had a series of personal things go wrong.
Okay, I've just been informed that we are live. So tonight, welcome to the Conservation Board meeting. We are a group that are advisory to the planning board. We don't make a decision, but we make recommendations based on the information presented to us. We use guidelines and policies and procedures that we use when we make our decision. Tonight, we have all the members of the board. We have represented from the town of Victor. We have Matt, Andrew, myself, Keith.
That's good. Sorry, I can't look my own.
So we have two items on the agenda. We will go with yours first because you're here present. I'm going to respect your time. You have some concerns about the 1086 Strong Road project. You have since submitted some series of emails and correspondence with regards to some questions, not get some answers. So we'll see what we can do to answer as much as possible tonight. So the floor is yours. Please just say your names, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dolores Banton. And I wrote to you as I explained because planning board told us if we wanted answers that we had to ask you. So
There we are.
Here we are.
Perfect.
that's why I tried to clarify it, and then unfortunately we had to send another letter because the situation didn't stay static. There was another meeting, and then because somehow this letter was the code enforcement officer surprisingly called me. And I had made all the calls to that office in 2022 and never got a response. So I want to be honest with everybody and say, well, he called me. So that was part of it. And then part of it was the concern about that we could no longer address anything to the planning board because they closed the public comments. And then the developers spoke. And then they read off this environmental assessment form, and I said I made 3 copies. So could I hand them over to you?
Yeah, we have some.
We got one as well.
I
Okay, you as well.
emailed the attachment.
Yeah, thank you.
But it was after we weren't allowed to speak that all this information was presented. Because we thought we were already in a rock and a hard place, and as I say, oh, made it worse. So now we would like to understand what the conservation board thinks of these 70 little conservation easements on a 34-acre property. That what the goal of conservation easements are is little itty bitty plots of land, or was it meant to be
Just a way of getting around it.
right? So we'd kind of like to know that and what to do about this, the one that I just handed you, where when I say no flooding and we've been flooded and they're gonna put berms up, they're gonna destroy the land, it's, oh, wait a minute. You know, the chance of us getting flooded again are increased. We don't see how it can be decreased when they're going to destroy the Droma state.
So if I heard you correctly, you have 3 questions basically.
On this
The
first letter, you
one
know,
is what's the conservation's
is this
opinion
what
is
you-
on-
That's what you meant, to have 70 little conservation easements on 34 acres, or did you mean a set aside? Because to me, this is game playing. And I know that's rude to say, but to me, it's just that that's not the intent. When my father died and he gave his 22 acres to the town of Charlotte, the whole thing was, it was for the enjoyment of the town of Charlotte. It was, you could build a pavilion on it, you could let the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts camp, which he had already been doing, but the whole point was that it was written in their charter that this was not developed land. He had a road in it, he had the farmer's There's a couple fields that have kept cut down for the enjoyment. But the whole point was it was a gift for conservation for people to enjoy forever. And when you're having 70 little easements on a 34-acre property, I don't see how anything will be conserved.
I don't see how it could be enforced either.
Okay.
Do you have a
The
map?
Second,
For that? Wait, do you have a, I don't have the
She didn't
map.
give me anything.
That's not no worries. Yeah, I think we have two, right?
Yeah, so for the easements, if we could, we could take that one first.
Yeah.
If there's really just two easements, they do run across quite a few properties, but it's one continuous easement. And maybe what you're looking at are the markers on each property, because, if this rectangle is your property and the easement runs back here, all the neighbors' easements are along the backside.
Mhm.
And then you'll see markers at each corner of each property like this. But it's one easement that's back here that runs across all those properties, so that's where you get your 70. But if you look at the land, it's one big piece of land and that the neighbors can't go back and disturb.
Well, that appears to be what they did on the most southerly edge of the property. The edge that's toward Taylor Road, it seems like there's a whole mishmash of easements dealing with some is don't touch, conservation. There was a whole mishmash all mixed together. And when you get that kind of thing, I'm wondering how it's even enforceable, because who's going to know where anything is and what little spot is going to be never touch and which little spot's going to be truly conservation area and
Right.
so I have a question. Where do you fall within this conservation model, as you put it?
We're at the bottom of the hill.
yeah, we're at the bottom of the
Near
hill.
Harlow Road.
Okay, so what does proposed conservation easement say about your section?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing about ours,
Okay,
but the last three west properties, the most west properties, which are quite a bit uphill, if they're going to level it out, they got a heck of a lot of dirt. I mean, a lot of dirt. But those three properties in particular, if they just go to a level spot, you're going to end up with all the water that's going to be in the front yards and the driveways and so forth, going to come right down to the road. Right now, there is just a very minor culvert like at the road, but that culvert directly drops into the Class C stream that comes across our property, which means anything that goes into that water is going to end up in that Class C stream. Well, as far as DEC sees it, as far as the developer sees it, he sees it as a
Intermittent.
intermittent stream, which flows 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all year long. There's water in that stream at 14 below. But that means that any of the stuff coming off of those fields is going to end up in that stream that comes across our property. And I know as far as code enforcement is concerned, they don't even think the stream exists, even though there's culverts that the town put in for it.
I made the assumption that you were tied into this project already. I thought that you had the maps. Bill Kaiser brought them to the meeting, last one, the one before, which is how I became aware of 70 conservation easements. And I was appalled. I didn't try and get his map. I think I have to do some freedom of information and come down here and, it's like, okay. Bill did it, he presented it, and so I thought that it would be in notes and you folks would know what we're talking about. So I didn't try and.
That's fine. And
I don't, ignorance.
I don't think we expected you to, to get the map and bring it. And we have, it has been before our board, so we have looked at it. It would just be easier if we had it here. When we reviewed the draft, there was not 70 easements. So that's why we were trying to just understand where the disconnect is. I think Matt described it well as, our understanding and our viewing of the maps is there's two easements. There's a no touch easement, so can't mow it, can't do anything. And then there is, no building, no structures, but you could do seasonal mowing, so a lesser form of an easement. But, we view it as sort of those two easements. So we were trying to figure out where the 70 came from.
Well, at the presentation, it was one of those things where they had several different shaded in areas. And each property had a mix of several different shaded areas.
Little here, a little there, a little here, a little there. And it's like, what?
Yeah.
We thought it was.
And it
It
was
could be-
clearly articulated that the shaded area represented a conservation easement.
Yeah, it could be utility or.
Is
Well,
that,
no, he said conservation.
They say that we're conservation, no touch, and
No, it was berms and no touch. And he said, if I wanted to know what no touch and berms mean, I had to come and ask you folks.
yeah, but the last presentation, the berms went away and they're being replaced with mounds.
And that's what prompted the next letter, because after we weren't allowed to talk, it's like, no, we didn't say berms. That's why I said, listen to the. listen-
okay, so just so that we can
Sorry.
really answer your question.
Sure.
Yes, thank you.
The questions you're asking us is, what does no touch mean? What does berms mean?
Right.
So that's one of the things that the planning board had advised you to come to us to ask about, right?
No touch, I think, Tim gave a pretty good synopsis of what that is. So no touch, again, no mowing, no building. Technically, if
trails.
the tree, no trails. Technically, if there was a tree in there and it fell over, you're not even supposed to go in and take that out. So it's truly no touch. It's supposed to stay, forever the way it is, and it'll just evolve. Forever a while.
Okay.
So that's your no touch. And then the less restrictive, again, to Tim's point, all that, except it does allow for some seasonal mowing. It does allow for trails to be made into it. So if you think about it, sometimes somebody will have a property and they're manicuring their lawn, and then near the back, perhaps there's a spot where they can mow only seasonally, and then all the way in the far back where we would consider it most sensitive, near a creek, near something, it would be no touch. So that's how sometimes when you see multiple, that's what it would be. Again, if you picture a perfect rectangle, I'm manicuring, I can only do this a couple times a year and I can't even touch it at all back there, it just stays forever wild, and it acts as a buffer. And a lot of times deer and animals will run through there, and that's why, again, they'll run along property so that there's a nice run there. But technically you could see there's an easement on this property and an easement on this property and these for two, maybe even on each of these. So that's how you could maybe get to your 70. But
If I can add to that, when a developer presents a proposal to us, the expectation is that the developer would make proposals of what kind of conservation easement they want. And then we will review it. It's not our position to tell them what the conservation easement, they know the guidelines and stuff like that. The board normally looks at about generally 3 types of conservation easement. Most restrictive, there's one that's very restrictive, least restrictive, and then one is a little bit of give and take. Most restrictive is a no touch, which is what we just explained. The least restrictive is where you can actually do some manicuring, you can do some games, you can't put up any structure, but you could do stuff with it. And the intermediate one where there's a little bit of give and take, maybe because of the history of the property, maybe because of the size of the property, maybe because of maybe the use, whether it's farming converted to something else, then there's a little bit of a give and take, as long as we don't think there's any major disruption to the environment or to the neighbors, et cetera, et cetera. So based on those 3 guidelines, there's sometimes slight modification, but we try to stay as close to the guidelines as possible so that we can maintain some consistency as we look at the case-by-case basis. That's from the Conservation Board's point of perspective. If there's something else that's been proposed, then that needs to be brought for us to consider. But until that's brought forward, we don't say, okay, fine, you can have like 10 different conservation easements, on one property. That is not the way we review or make recommendations or agree to proposals being brought to us.
In
That helps.
that congruency is something that's important to us and we look at where, you know, having small random spots of conservation isn't the spirit of, you know, we want it, you know, the larger tracts of land to be set aside. So that is, you know, something that we keep an eye on and is keeping in the spirit of what we're trying to do is to not have, you know, random pockets of easement, but to try to lump them all together.
Yeah, there should be a natural flow of those
Yeah.
easements, really is, if you look at it from a really bird's eye, high level view, it should flow. And that's what I'm just reading some of the previous notes here. There's two types, there's a type A and a type B, you mentioned, those are touch, or non-touch or forever wild, and then there's also the site specific. We'd have to go back and look at what those explicitly look like on the maps, but from what I can tell, it is, as Tim had mentioned, kind of a congruent flow of easements. If we had the maps in front of us, we could easily point that out.
Is there any way to find out how much of these easements are no touch? And in other words, if they're doing 50% of property is supposed to be a conservation easement, how much of it is no touch? And also, how does it get enforced? Tattling is not, this is a horrible deal for us. We don't want to.
So, I mean, and maybe this, getting back to the 70 is we do require it to be marked, so it is visible to the landowners, you know, exactly where the lines are. But, you know, there is no, you know, requirement that we check once a year or anything like that. So it is kind of, I don't know if I'd use the word tattle, but if there's a code violation, be it, you know, too many cars in the driveway or a violation of the conservation easement, that is something that, you know, you could bring to the attention of the code enforcement office. And, you know, it does happen. They're, you know, they're receptive to that and they drive by and they take a look, and the easements allow for the town to go and check. So it, you know, I get your point that it, you know, feels odd calling up and tattling on a neighbor, but unfortunately that sort of is how the process is.
We've had that before.
Yeah, and it does happen.
I hate using the term tattle.
Yeah.
Highly technical.
I mean, I usually just say that code enforcement is very limited, you know, if you think about the entire town. So they can't be eyes and ears everywhere. And sometimes it's in a backyard that you can't even tell.
Yeah.
So if you made them aware of it, they will come check it out. And then, you know, then they've got protocols if somebody is doing something in the easement that they're not supposed to. But it does start with marking. And we've been really adamant over the last few years about making sure everything's marked. There's standards, they have to be marked, they have to be marked with a plaque, they have to be marked with 4x4 posts, or sometimes the builders will come back or developers will come back and say, can I put big rock with a thing on? Yes. Can I plant trees on each? Yes. So we'll allow for some, you know, give and take there, but they have to be clearly marked so that if code enforcement says this isn't supposed to be mowed and they see the 2 trees here and there's a line between them and clearly you're mowing past it, they'll come and talk to you about it.
Okay,
I think
it's one of these things that we figure it's gonna happen because the lots on that they're subdividing are all shotguns. You got 3-acre lots, but at least 3 of them, especially on the most westerly end, well, 4 of them on the most westerly end. Really, you've only got less than an acre that they can actually use. So who's gonna buy 3 acres of land where 2/3, you know, half to 2/3 of the land they cannot use?
I mean, that's a good point. We also work a lot with the developers, and that's something, again, we've done, especially in the last couple of years, is to make sure that developers let the potential homeowners know where the easements are ahead of time. that gets harder as, property changes hands.
Yeah,
But as far as, me walking in and saying, oh my God, this awesome 3 acres, I can't wait to mow it all. They're trying to educate, we're trying to educate the developers, and the developers are trying to educate potential home buyers as to.
okay. What we're trying to avoid is like the mess. What's the road that goes between Wangum and Taylor or Strong? There's a road that goes,
Brian,
yeah, yeah, there's a development that's in
Drive
there
by it every
between
day.
Wangum and Strong Road, where they put the road in and you've got house, and they dug way the heck into the hillside. Apparently they had the retaining walls collapsed in 2 or 3 of the houses. It was a big mess up in there. And to tell you the truth, the whole subdivision is ugly as sin. But in this case, you're putting it in an area where essentially you've got mainly rural homes. There's a couple of show houses in there, but I mean, just a couple, but you got converted barns, you've got farmhouses that have been there for generations that have a fair amount of footage, but that's because it's been added on to every generation, that kind of thing. And then you've got this new development and the guys wants to come in, he wants to put in luxury McMansions. And they're going to be 2-3 story, huge beasts, 4,000 feet or more. So it's like, whoa.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's nothing,
so,
can't, as long as they're building the code, there's not a lot we can do
Yeah.
about what they decide to do there.
So to answer your question about how do you get the information, so I'm just reading through here, this has been through preliminary subdivision process, so that's what we had looked at previously. This will have to go through a final subdivision process, which will come back to us. At a minimum, you could come back into that meeting and we would have that information available. I think you could also take the practical route and probably talk to the developer. You could probably come to the town and ask. You mentioned FOIL, Freedom of Information Act. You could do that. I think there's a few different avenues for you to get that information. But the easiest and I think the least of restrictive would be to wait for the final subdivision process, which I don't know where they are with that process.
So that's up on the agenda.
Right, exactly. So you'd have to check
Watch our
in.
agendas.
Yeah, watch the agenda, check in with the secretary. See.
Well, yeah,
Okay.
I was just gonna add one more comment. Initially, when this came before us, if you guys remember, these houses were way back, significantly farther back in the lots. And so our goal, as we've kind of mentioned, is to keep as much of the natural topography, geography as possible. So we worked, I think there was a very limited easement language initially.
Yes.
So just to tighten that up, our goal is similar to yours, to obviously limit the impact in our town, but so it has gotten better, believe it or not. Obviously not all the way through, but encourage you to come to that next meeting as well.
it does seem inconsistent to us though, because our house is officially still considered a new build, I'm thinking, 2006. And at that time, we had to keep our 10 acres. That's how we were able to buy the property because it could not be divided by the town of Victor and our next door neighbor this way and that way couldn't subdivide. So just up the road, I mean, a quarter mile up the road. We're putting all these houses on a little bit of acreage. And everything we did, I had to have a letter from the DEC allowing us to straighten out the creek because the land was a swamp. And then after we got permission for that, had that dug, then we had to come back to the town and say, okay, we really want a pond. And they said, you have to get a letter from the DEC. And it's like, okay, so now why when I ask about this and code enforcement says, no, it's a US Geological Survey map. And I said, this stream isn't even on that. So why did the town, not that many years ago, have us really pester the DEC? We had visits, we had letters, we had topographical, they had planes going over, giving us maps, they had all sorts of stuff. And yet here, this poor creek is going we have paradise, we don't want paradise lost. It's going, the stream comes through the property. It exchanges, we have outflow with our pond. The pond goes over into the seasonal swamp, which is where the wood ducks live, which is why we didn't drain the seasonal swamp because wood ducks live there. We don't want paradise lost. And we thinking if the water's coming down the road and bringing all the salt onto our property, and if I can dig it into the creek, prefer that than having our whole front of our, I mean, it's just not a, I'm just saying this, oh my gosh. What are we losing here?
Now, part of
So
the
I
code
think-
though is, oh, go ahead. Tim.
So I'm thinking what one way we can look at this is to make sure that the developer takes into consideration what the spin-off is as it affects your property. With regards to once the developer goes through the natural process and does and crosses T's, it will be a bit of a challenge to alter anything that he proposes once he's met all the code requirements. I think where you probably can get some support is with regards to how does the proposed runoff, et cetera, affect your property? Worst case scenario, best case scenario, and that needs to be taken into consideration. Just to be sensitive and respectful to your concerns and that you have answers. I think that makes any sense. So
Well,
that,
Again, the stream that goes across our property is a tributary eventually to Runaway Creek. So it's one of those things, if you start polluting our end of it, it's gonna go all the way.
Right.
So that stream feeds into a pond right in front of your house?
No, it doesn't feed into it. Actually, our pond, it's 12 feet deep. It has 2 springs in the bottom of it. And we're
Okay.
constantly having water flowing into the creek. As well as the fact that that creek is running all year long.
Right here, and it's, we have a mowed strip, and here's the seasonal swamp.
Yeah.
We have seen runoff get better after development sometimes. I mean, they need to show plans and how they're gonna retain the water and move the water. So sometimes we've seen it get better because they're redirecting the water that you said is already, you've had problems in the past. So,
If all this is gonna come up in the final subdivision,
yeah,
So-
they have to have a plan to keep
so
water from
it's-
leaving their property.
Okay.
I think we can receive your comments and your questions.
Okay. Now, do you have anything to do with the fact that they're putting wells in there? Because it's one of the things that we had found out. Luckily, we're far enough back on our property that we're actually in a different aquifer than the people that are close to the road. People who are close to the road are actually part of a pocket aquifer that goes a lot further south. And where we are, we're back 700 feet, 780 feet from the road. And we're actually in the aquifer that used to feed the old town wells. So we're lucky that our wells are only 36 feet. The people at the road, their wells are all over 100. And 3 of the people that we know had to redrill their wells when Hiawatha Hills went in. And because it dried up that whole end. When these houses go in, that is a small leg of an aquifer that doesn't have a heck of a lot of water in it. Are they gonna be able to feed all those houses? Because that aquifer is being fed all the way from the south, and Hiawatha Hills is in play.
that would be a developer design.
Yeah,
the
the engineers would work on that.
That would be
Work on
a thing. That would be-
figuring it out.
So, to get back to your questions,
Mhm.
I think we address the interpretation of the 72 easements.
Yep.
The easements, what we think about purpose of easements, and there was the other question about beans or burns.
Berms. They told me that the other ones were berms, and then after the meeting closed. Public comment, they said, no, we didn't mean berms, we meant mounds, so then my first letter is wrong. Because they told me that the easements were berms and no touch.
So
So if
who's
they're not.
they? Who's they?
The developer.
The developer is telling you this.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's his last name, I don't know.
But it's, again, he's not actually putting any properties in the house. He's just subdividing and then selling it out to somebody else. So,
He's not the developer.
no, well, he's not he's the guys
The
that
guy that
is,
presents, we don't.
yeah, he's the guy that presents. The whole idea is they're subdividing the property, providing access apparently in water. Beyond that, then, the people who buy the property have, or there's going to be a developer. Right now, apparently it's all up in the air. But it sounds like there'll be one developer, they'll be putting in houses for the whole area. And as demand basis.
And your question is, what does berms mean?
Yeah, as compared mounds and berms, what does a berm get you that a mound will, won't, or whatever?
Easement.
Easement?
Yeah.
So we don't use berms or mounds for easement. It's part of the strategy used to, what should I say it? To restrict flow or noise or land slippage, et cetera, et cetera. It's just part of the landscaping measures that is used to prevent any disruption to the neighborhood or to the surrounding.
Okay, so it's used mainly to hide things.
So you can. Berms as easement.
A berm could be in an easement, or it could be on the Manicure law.
Define it. You could define where it starts.
You
but
could
it's not-
define it, yeah.
It's not an easement, like a berm is not an easement. An easement is basically a section of an area.
Right.
That's.
So it can be a part of it.
Yeah.
Well, then he misspoke.
Sorry.
Yeah, it sounds like there's.
Yeah.
Because he told me that there were two types of easement. Wasn't
Right,
writing
and
a
that we
series of-
covered, yeah.
You know, I was writing it down, two types of easement, so I mean, it's just. I make a lot of.
And there is,
That one.
there are two easements, you were right. But then the berm and mound are totally separate from the two easements. right?
Okay,
They
so
don't
the
have to
berm and
be-
mound could be in an easement.
Exactly.
They're just
It
features
sounds
of the
like
land.
not-
Yeah, they're just features of the land. They could be in, out,
They're land features, okay.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. We're trying to,
Yeah, it gets technical.
yeah, well, we're concerned about this whole development.
Right. Just FYI, an easement goes with the land. So once that easement is set, it's basically set forever. It takes a lot to undo an easement. So if I bought a piece of property with that easement on it, chances are I sell it to the next guy, he's got to live with that same easement.
Mhm.
And then further and further down the line. So one of the things the town has, you have, like you're talking about conservation easements, there are utility easements. Okay, which allow like the electric company, if they gotta go in, or town, if they have to go in to fix something. Sometimes there are other issues with stormwater management. Where some developments, I'm not saying this one because I'm not sure off the top of my head, but they have a stormwater pond basically. Where when it's
Oh, yeah.
heavy rains, well, sometimes the outflows, something happens, and if the town is responsible for it. They have to have access to get to it.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? So that they can clean it out and make sure that it's functioning properly. So there are a variety of other, when we say easements, it's not just conservation easements. So I don't know if you knew
Okay.
that, but just trying to
Yeah,
make sure
no,
that
it makes sense.
you have as much information as possible.
Very good. Very good.
We just don't know how to put the brakes on this overbuilding and destruction of the drumline and probably damage to the creek. It's a gorgeous area. I mean, we drove by it tonight. It's a gorgeous area. It's going to be lost. Understand that. But if some of it's supposed to be saved, we want it saved. We don't want it gamed out by, oh, I've got the first 10 feet of the driveway and that's an easement. We don't,
Neither do we.
we really
Yeah.
want it in this, what we think is our understanding of the spirit of the conservation easement is that really the land set aside, you have to leave 50% of the loan. And that's what we want to see. When somebody, my neighborhood gets up and says, you know, there's 70 easements and I'm, oh my God, that isn't any concept I've ever heard of for an easement. I think we're just playing the game.
And so that,
It's
just to be clear, that's not the case here, is there aren't 70 little easements. It is congruent.
Maybe across the 70 properties. but it would be one easement that maybe cross the properties.
Yeah, but it's not that
Like
big.
Gosh, it's what, 11
Yeah, it's not even that
Maybe
big.
10. So, I mean, that spirit that you described, you know, is important to us and is how we've, you know, tentatively approved, you know, this development. So just, you know, for what it's worth, we have that same spirit and, you know, it's good that we hear these concerns because when it comes back to us, we'll remember. And I think there was another woman whom we spoke with as well on this property. So it's apparent that there's a lot of concern here of the community. So, you know, it's good that you guys raise your voice and opinion because we'll remember that when it comes back. So.
Okay.
Is there anything else we should be actively doing to try and get this? We want it developed responsibly. We know it's sold, we know it's going to be developed, that's not the point. The point is, we want it, it's gonna happen, but we don't want it destroyed. We want it. I mean, if you look at our property, it was a swamp when we bought it, and boy, I'll tell you, it's much better off. We have more creatures on it than it probably could have ever been before.
Yeah, I gotta shoot deer out of the driveway every morning.
You know, got a picture of a pileated woodpecker this morning, I mean, 'cause it's like, he's back. We want to see that same kind of thing happen and not the destruction. And yes, I will miss the cattle. They actually low, they do, they're cold. But I know that's not gonna come back. But I don't want it to be destroyed either.
Neither do we. That's for sure.
Yeah,
That's what
and
we're-
especially from a developer that's not even in the area, they're out of North Carolina.
They usually outside person, so they're not emotional about it. It's just business for them, but.
Yeah.
We do thank you for your concerns and we have it noted. So that when it does come up again for review. We could rehash some of those concerns that you express and make sure that some of the design criteria does address your concern.
Very good. Thanks.
That's what we as a board can commit to. Other than
Just
that,
as another comment,
Yes.
you know, obviously you're concerned,
Mhm.
planning board meets twice a month.
Right.
If you go on the town website, you'll be able to see what's on their schedule, agenda, whatever. So when this project comes up, you could attend,
Yep.
you know, the planning board meetings also. and-
Yeah, we've been attending.
Okay.
I encourage you, and come back to us too. I encourage you to come back when we review this. You know, I, to make sure that we hold us to it. I mean, make sure that we're doing what we said we're doing. I think that's fair. I don't know when that's gonna be. Family, this board knows when that's gonna be, but
No.
keep an
Well,
eye
they've
on
been
it.
screwing around with this thing there for over years.
Trust me, these projects.
long
take
time.
time. So, yeah, that's my recommendation.
Okay.
Is there anything I should be working on preparing for next time? In other words, I didn't bring that map. I didn't know to.
so not for nothing, and I'm not sure how this will work. It would always be in your interest if you feel very strongly about something. And you choose to get professional support in terms of to validate what you think that's on you. So that your argument is stronger. We can tell you to do that or recommend it.
Right.
I'm just saying, just as a matter of discussion, you ask what you can do. We can just, that's something you can consider. Well, it's not a recommendation on our part. We want you to go spending money that you don't have to spend.
Right.
But if you feel very strongly about it, you can think about it and that's up to you. But again, as a board, our responsibility will be to look at what's presented in front of us and make sure it fits the criteria based on the procedures, the guidelines that we have to use to evaluate and make recommendations.
Okay.
Yeah, grounded, based and grounded objective, you know, so we're, like you said, we can't make any go off and do this recommendations. I think the only thing we can say is come back next time and, you know, whatever you do on your own. That's to support your case, that's totally up to you.
Thank you very much. for
Thank
your
you.
time
Thanks, folks.
and kindness. I really appreciate it, because I know we sent you up. So,
Yep. Oh, you're welcome.
We'll get out of here.
Nowhere else.
No.
Stay.
Again, thank you.
Thank you. No.
Good night.
Thank you.
So. Shape on is the second item, second item on our agenda. And the applicant is requesting to approve to construct a 2 by 48 by 12 pole barn, a 7.5 acre personal storage. They've also provided responses from the neighbors in regards to their objection slash agreement to them put it on, and seem to have gotten favorable responses from the neighbors. Their own proposal, they seem to be straightforward thing. I mean, they're not disrupting anything. They have the space constructed based on this acreage. The runoff is a very negligible impact on the environment. So I would see any concerns at all with regards to that construction.
Water, I'm looking at it right now, there's no water issues.
They're putting it on a flat part of the land, looks like,
And
and
behind the house.
behind the house, and it looks like there's no trees.
Right.
You know, at least not many trees.
You guys can see that thing, but they're putting it over
Yeah.
there.
Right. You know.
Right in the pocket.
Yep, see it up there now on the screen.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
That's to the lower.
The only, yeah, logical spot.
Yep.
It's already cleared. They're not removing trees.
And now moving trees. And not moving.
No easements on this property?
I don't see anything
It was
like.
already mentioned. Anyone has any other comments on that? Yes.
No comments.
No other further comments from me.
Yes, I guess we'll have it for that. We have no objections. We think seems. What we would
Try to limit disturbance.
students, yeah.
Yeah.
And we also have favorable results from the neighbors, so there's nobody to come and worry what they're gonna do.
Right.
Few steps. That being said, the next thing we'll address is the approval of the minutes of February 7th. Yeah, it's like, we're still in February.
It's short.
I think when the minutes was circulated, I don't think anybody had any.
Right,
Yeah.
it looked fine when I saw them the first time.
In fact, I'll make a motion to approve those meeting minutes.
All right, boss. Any second? Second.
I was given.
Hold on here.
All in favor?
Yeah, was it you gonna do this?
All right, any objections? Okay. And it's up, February 7th approved. Do we have any information from the town?
No, unfortunately, I have nothing to report at this moment. Which is good.
That's good.
Thanks.
Can I make a motion, we
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
I.
Meeting adjourned at 7:15.
Whoa, long one.
7:15, yeah. Yeah, watching it. Be off?
Nope.